Welcome back, my friends, to the D-Rate the Hate podcast. I am your host, Wilk of WilksWorld.com, and I am so incredibly grateful that you are taking the time to join me for another powerful DTH episode. Friends, at the D-Rate the Hate podcast, it's all about bettering the world one attitude at a time. See, we did not create the hate, but with your help, we can derate the hate. That all starts with gratitude and personal accountability. We cannot control everything that happens to us in life, but we can control how we react to it. How we act, how we react, no matter what happens to us, how we react to it makes the difference. Friends, there is only one good thing about a bad attitude, and that is that we have the ability as individuals to change it. Here on the DTH podcast, we strive to bring you great guests and provide tools to do just that. Please be sure to share it with your friends. Subscribe if you haven't done so. Ratings and feedback are always greatly appreciated. And with that, let's get to this week's episode. Those who know me or have been listening to the D-Rate the Hate podcast for long know of my great passion for depolarization, trying to bring people together of differing mindsets. Why, you might ask? It's because I truly believe that polarization is the one true existential threat we face as a nation. Now, just for a point of clarification, I don't want anybody to think that depolarization means you have to give in or give up on your principles, your mindset. But I do believe we need to be having the conversation. Walking lockstep with any one singular mindset without getting to know or listening to those with whom we disagree is not the right answer. Now, while there are more than several figureheads and mouthpieces out there with a vested interest in keeping people divided, there are incredible people out there working diligently day in and day out to bring people together. My guest this week happens to be one of those leading figures in that depolarization movement. In fact, he says polarization is the one problem that ensures that all other problems will not be solved. I am so excited to welcome for the first time to the DTH podcast my great friend, my colleague at Braver Angels, National Ambassador for Braver Angels, John Wood Jr. So much value in this incredible conversation. You are not going to want to miss a minute of it. So let's get to it. Here we go. John Wood Jr., my Braver Angels brother, National Ambassador to Braver Angels. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me on the D-Rate the Hate podcast. John, I've been looking forward to it for sure.
Brother Wilk, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, and all the more so doing it hot on the mic. So we're finally doing it, man. I'm glad we could make the time.
We are finally doing it. You know, it's funny. We've been doing things together for, it's got to be a couple years now with our favorite organization, Braver Angels. And I've had cameos on your show. I know I've referenced your work on mine plenty of times, and this is the first time we've actually sat down for a conversation together on the mic, just you and I. And so grateful for it, man. So grateful for it. And more than that, I'm grateful for all the work that you've been doing with Braver Angels for as long as you have. So, John, a lot of the DTH listeners are very familiar with Braver Angels because of me talking about them, obviously. But I cannot nearly as eloquently talk about Braver Angels as you do, John. So tell me, John Wood Jr., how did you get involved with Braver Angels, and what do you do in your role as National Ambassador for Braver Angels?
Yeah, well, appreciate the question. You know, it's one of those things where I'm always trying to figure out, like, okay, do I give the medium version, the long version, the extra long version, the extra long version? There are long versions to this story. There's not too many short ones. But I'll try and shoot somewhere in the middle here.
Sounds good, man.
Yeah, well, so I guess I'll just pick it up. I'll skip a whole lot of life details and say that I'm a person who grew up a liberal activist, who was very inspired by Barack Obama's 2008 campaign, who believed that the idea behind hope and change was sort of creating sort of a post-partisan, post-racial sort of America. I was one of many people who was inspired by Obama's 2004 keynote address. I don't know if you remember it, Wilk, but it was the one that really delivered him to the national stage. Where
Brought
he
him to
said,
the national stage. Yep.
yeah, he said, we're not red states or blue states or the United States of America. We're not, black, white, or Latino America. This is the United States of America. And I had really thrown myself behind Obama's campaign and started really studying conservatism and Republican perspectives from the vantage point of somebody who wanted to bring Republicans into this unifying Obama movement. Now, I had always had some conservatives and folks who more traditional values in my family, so that was in my background. But I really leaned into it in terms of consciously studying some of those things at that time, and wound up experiencing this very disconcerting realization after having studied conservatism for a certain period of time. In an effort to convert Republicans, I looked up and sort of started asking myself questions, and I went down a list of issues and asking myself where I stood on them. And I looked up one day, I was like, holy cow, I kind of am a Republican myself, and really didn't like that realization. It was like coming out of the closet or something like that.
Oh, man.
Yeah, I know. It was terrible, Wilk. It was terrible. But, the thing that remained true about me was that, I believed in what I considered to be sort of the original sort of, Obama vision, or the Obama vision as I understood it from that early campaign.
Sure.
Just wanted to bring people together, wanting to make it possible for people to understand each other humanely, empathetically, across party and race and religion and so forth. So I ran for Congress. I ran for Congress against Maxine Waters as an unknown Republican challenger in 2014 in South Los Angeles. I lost, but I lost in the smallest landslide of any Republican or Democrat who'd ever run against Maxine before or since, including folks who literally raised hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars. I raised like 10 grand, in that race. Yeah. I basically ran as a hope and change Republican. I ran a very bipartisan campaign. My team was very bipartisan, and I tried to bring that sort of fraternal spirit to the Republican Party on an institutional level. I was elected second vice chairman of the Republican Party of Los Angeles County in 2015. Interestingly, I'm already tipping into to a longer version of the story here. Interestingly, the LA County GOP is actually the biggest county Republican Party in America, but it doesn't matter because it's still 4 times smaller than the LA County Democratic Party. So we still rarely win anything. But I had I wanted to see a politics where we actually had reasonably friendly relationships with the other side, where we could come together and have debates and discussions in front of the community, still compete, obviously.
Reasonable and civil back and forth, and being able to actually talk.
Yeah, sort of emphasizing the idea that, like, hey, we're all Angelinos here. We want what's best for the city, for the state, and for the country, and so forth. And what wound up happening was I wound up basically being threatened with the end of my career for being too friendly with the wrong Republicans. I couldn't even get far enough to try and bridge the gap between Republicans and Democrats, because what had happened at the time was that the Republican Party, sort of nationally, but definitely in California, was sort of torn in this internecine, in the civil war between sort of the old guard establishment and conservative factions on the one hand versus the insurgent Ron Paul libertarian wing on the other hand.
Okay.
And I sort of got caught being friends with both sides and having people tell me, no, you can't do that. You got to pick one or the other. If not, you're going to make enemies out of the people who were your friends. And I just didn't want to play that sort of game. All of this was kind of before Trump came along. When Trump came along, for myself, he just had a breed of politics that I just had a very difficult time, sort of getting excited about myself. Yeah, his approach. But even before Trump came along, I sort of realized that, like, hey, my philosophical disposition is not very welcome here in the GOP, at least on this institutional level. I mean, it was different if I'm talking to just regular Republicans in the neighborhood,
Sure.
tend to be very popular with Republican voters and just ordinary folks who wanted something better for the country and for their communities. But I realized I needed to find another way, and so I tried to launch, actually, Wilk, a digital media network way back then. This was like 2017. That was meant to be sort of like the Young Turks or the Daily Wire, with a couple differences. One, it was meant to be cross-partisan, bringing together people who disagreed about politics, but who agreed about how we ought to be treating each other in politics.
Right.
And two, it was meant to jump off the screen. It was meant to be something that would build sort of a cross-partisan, cross-cultural audience that could lead to people actually engaging with each other in physical reality on the local community level. And so I tried to do that. I wound up getting hit with a cease and desist letter from a multi-billion-dollar company that didn't like the fact that the name of our network was a little bit close to the name of their company, even though we were dealing with news and information. They were dealing with baseball hats and basketball jerseys, whatnot. And but then a friend of mine who I had met through an organization that you're familiar with called No Labels, but a friend of mine by the name of Luke Phillips introduced me to, or turned me on to, the existence of this group then called Better Angels. And I looked at Better Angels online, and I got really excited because I thought, holy cow, these people have exactly my philosophy. And
they're on the same track. Yep.
On the same track, and they were doing the sort of on the ground, in-person sort of event building. It is the workshops and so forth, bringing together red and blue. They were already doing the things on the ground that I thought a media network could lead to. But what I noticed at the time was that they had a Facebook page, which was sort of barren and abandoned. They had a website that was text heavy and pixelated. They had a YouTube channel with a couple of nice clips, but nothing much else going on. They basically had no digital media strategy. And I had just spent a year trying to build up a digital media strategy with the exact same philosophy in mind. And so I drove down with my friend Luke to sit in on a workshop in San Diego, drove from LA to San Diego. Just so happened that the two of the founders of the organization were there, Bill Doherty, who was moderating, and David Blankenhorn, who's the founding, of course, was and is the founding president of Better, Now Braver Angels. Another funny thing about that workshop, though, there's an old fella sitting in a corner. He didn't participate in the workshop, but there's an old fella sitting in the corner holding a guitar the whole time, just wearing kind of a friendly smile on his face. And at the end of the workshop, which, keep in mind, Wilk, I don't know if you've ever done one of these red blue workshops, it was a 7-8 hour affair. So at the end of it, this old fellow, he gets up, and after we're all fairly exhausted, after this long workshop, he starts strumming the guitar and he starts singing, "This land is your land, this land is my land, from the New York Island, da 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 da." And he sounds pretty good, but after about 8 minutes of that, I was just like, okay, I'm tired. I'm ready to go home. Can anybody ask this fella to take 5? And then at the end of it, David Blankenhorn comes and he puts his arm around the guy and he says, "For all the young folks here who don't recognize him, I just want to introduce you all to my good friend Peter Yarrow from Peter, Paul, and Mary." And I was
wow.
That's why you got to give him 10 minutes to play the song.
Right.
So met Peter Yarrow there too, who of course is amazing. And so I brought this media network idea to Better Angels, to David Blankenhorn, and he got back to me a few weeks later and he said, "John," he said, "I like your media network idea. I want to get behind it. I want to hire you to build it." He said, "But more than that," he said, "I looked into your background." He said, "I want to get behind your voice. I want to get behind your pen. I know what you've done. I know what you stand for. I want Better Angels to be a platform for you to speak to America on race and depolarization, because I think the country needs your voice." And the thing about it, Wilk, is that I have been, active as an activist for this kind of reconciliation politics for literally in one form or fashion or another, you could say since I was 15 years old, and
All right.
I was
Okay.
like, 30. I'd have been just turning 31 at that time, and I never made any money doing any of that, you know, and stacking part-time jobs. Even when I was running for office and when I was working for the Republican Party, that was actually a glorified volunteer position, which I
Sure.
got a lot
Sure.
of, which still puts you in the center of a lot of people's grief. And so yeah, I mean, it was sort of my big break. And I just remember it being just a deeply meaningful moment of gratitude for me. And then the next thing David Blankenhorn said was, the only problem is we don't have any money. Of course you don't. Of course you don't. He said, but he said, if you volunteer with us for a while, he said, we can get some fundraising together, and we'll we'll shake the tin cup at the right people, and I bet we can put together the money to get you hired. And ultimately that basically happened. And so, yeah, I pretty much gave you one of the longer versions of the story, Wilk, but
No,
I
and
felt like you deserved the Odyssey.
no, and that's good because I want the DTH listeners to have that. And there's so much there, John, that I want to unpack, and a couple of things that I want to touch on. But then I want to, and I want to use those things to dive into kind of where the direction I was thinking that I want this conversation to go. So first of all, thank you very much for that rendition, even though it was a longer one. It brings so much clarity to, how this digital thing got tied to Better and Now Braver Angels, and that's
Yeah.
awesome. So thank you for that. So
Mm.
I want to go back to, a couple of those things you said there, John, those different awakenings that you had. First of all, your intention is to really be, you're leaning in on the Barack Obama campaign, that wave. You want to bring conservatives to that.
Mm.
And in doing so, and this is what I think way too many people are afraid to do today.
Mm.
In doing so, you're actually diving into conservatism to understand them better, to
Mm.
see how we can bring people together. Now
Mm.
people are just far too quick and eager to attack versus learn. And I
Mm.
think that's very unfortunate.
Mm. Right.
We have people who are less interested in civility and unity than they are about this like tribalism and polarization. And
Mm.
that's one thing I want to get back to, because you talked about being, starting this at a very young age and really realizing that, I would rather bring people together than tear people apart.
Mm.
And when you dove into conservatism and started to see, wait, I actually relate to this. I relate to this. I relate to this. It's something that I've been talking about so much lately, John, is as we find out more about those people that we oppose or supposedly oppose, or that are in that other tribe, now all of a sudden we're starting to realize, well, I do kind of relate to that,
Mm.
or I can see where they're coming from on that. So
Mm.
that whole dynamic, and I think a lot of people are just maybe afraid, right? Because like you said, the other thing that other awakening that you had in there was, as soon as you got in and found out, okay, maybe I am a Republican, and then you dive into Republican politics, and now you've got two different factions of the Republican side that are saying, well, you
Mm.
can't be friends with him and you can't be friends with them. And now if you're going to spend your time with them, you're surely not going to spend time with us. So
Mm.
that's weird. But way too many tribalistic mentalities have been fracturing our politics for too long, that now really nothing is getting done.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
now is where, in my mind, if we don't, as a nation, as a people, start to focus on depolarization,
Mhm.
polarization will wipe us out.
Mm.
In my opinion, John, and you can tell me where you stand on this, I think polarization is one of the, if not the, only existential threats that we face as a nation. There's a
Mhm.
lot of people that use that word. We hear it way too much nowadays. It's one of the most overused phrases that I can
Mhm.
think of hearing lately. is
Mm.
this is an existential threat. That's an existential threat.
Yeah.
Donald Trump is an existential threat. The Democrats are an existential threat. The woke mob is an existential threat. It's the most overused thing in the world. But I think personally, the only real existential threat we face is polarization. And that is now leading to, and this is just a symptom or a byproduct of that, but that institutional distrust.
Right.
People no longer trust, well, very seldom did people, not in my lifetime did I know a lot of people that trusted politicians, but I mean, they don't trust the
But
politicians.
it's getting worse and worse, isn't it?
Right? So talk about that for me, John. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm where you are on this. I mean, the sort of quick way I say it is to say that, polarization is the one problem that ensures that all other problems will not be solved. It really doesn't matter what the issue is. If it can be solved, you're going to have your best chance of solving it by marshaling the full capacity, talents, resources of the American people and putting that to bear on the problem. But you can only do that with a culture of trust that can yield some degree of unity. In the absence of that, what you have are people who take the rules of society and the institutions of society and essentially weaponize them for the purposes of partisan and tribal gain, because they don't see themselves as being engaged in a competitive process that's still supposed to yield progress for the common good, even if they don't agree with an individual political or legislative outcome, but rather the rules and the institutions of society themselves are really only weapons and tools that are being used to vanquish an enemy while speaking sort of the superficial language of, sharing a community, sharing a country together,
Right.
Societies have fallen this way in the past. You have to have a commitment to something bigger than yourself, something that transcends yourself. The idea of a shared nation, of our having a shared destiny as a people, that should be something that's big enough for us to say, okay, this is bigger than our differences. Even if I disagree with you, even if I disagree with you vehemently, I should have enough humility to be able to accept the fact that there's a process by which we engage in our disagreements. And if I lose this round, well, I've got to come back with better arguments the next time around, right? And that at the end of the day, the thing that allows us to hold society together isn't so much, this is just the ultimate cliche, but it isn't so much whether I win or lose this round or the next. It's literally how we play the game, right? Because life is not just about the bills that are passed through Congress. It's a very small piece of our actual existence, right? The laws matter, but it's about our ability to run schools together, to run neighborhoods together, to literally.
You've got to play for the long game.
Yeah, exactly.
And
exactly.
People are too focused on what's right in front of their nose, and they aren't thinking about the long game anymore.
That's right. That's right. So you can take a look you can break it down sort of institution by institution. I mean, it used to be like with the courts, Supreme Court nominees you wouldn't even really have to vote on them in the Senate. It was just sort of taken for granted that like, hey, president's got the prerogative to pick his nominee. The Senate will advise and consent, but really this is kind of a formality. They'll say, hey, this guy a serial killer? No? Okay, well then let him go. Now, these are heated debates, and you have people, pushing forward sort of, tricks and tactics and parliamentary maneuvers. You've got, until finally gets a situation where, Mitch McConnell says we're not even going to consider a Democratic, nominee during this cycle. And Democrats come back and say, well, hey, let's just pack the court, and expand the number of justices indefinitely. And what it becomes is a race to the bottom, and it's the same thing, of course, in a different context with the institution of media. You've got one side who will sort of, from my vantage point, talk about like mostly peaceful protests. And then you've got, Tucker Carlson sort of coming back around and saying like, well, January 6th wasn't that bad because these people were peaceful, even though these people were violent. And everybody's trying to give their shade of the story without just conceding the fact that we've just got bullshit on all sides,
Right.
And, even if you think that 70% of the problem is the other side, or 80 or 90%, you still have 100% responsibility to own up for whatever your part in the mess is.
Oh, yeah. It's too much whataboutism.
Too much whataboutism.
It's gotten to be, my tribe is my tribe, and I am going to stick with them come hell or high water. Your tribe is your tribe, and I am going to hate your tribe come hell or high water. And every time somebody tries to bring up something that my tribe did, I'm going to just start throwing out what about. And that kind of garbage, John, is how we got here, right? Because now everybody is focused so much on the evil deeds that tribe did that they forget the humanity in those people that make up that tribe. They forget the fact that, kind of going back to what we were saying earlier, there's a lot of stuff that we would agree on, like you being a Democrat activist, and then starting to learn about the conservative Republican and who the conservative Republican is, and then all of a sudden you realize I've got a lot more in common with these folks than I ever imagined.
Sure.
Once people get so stuck in that tribal mentality and that whataboutism stuff, they start to lose focus on anything good that side possibly could have, going on with them. And then all of a sudden, every single thing that is said about that other tribe, they're an extremist. They're a this, they're a that. This is all they do. And now all the people that are following said mouthpieces on Twitter or Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, whatever, all they see from the people that they listen to is the negative that they're throwing out about the other side. It shuts them down. It puts out that wall of separation. They no longer even have an inkling in their mind that person could be, could have 70, 80, 90% of their life values, of their core values in common.
Right.
They are solely focused on the few things that separate them. And then you have mouthpieces that keep that wall of separation up.
That's correct. And so, the power, of course, of the experiences that we're able to cultivate at Brave Angels is that it allows people to see each other up close enough and in a hospitable enough context to be able to actually sort of reawaken ourselves to that deeper human familiarity. It allows us to sort of see the fact that, like, okay, our politics are different, but you know what? There's real core human values here that we actually have in common. And even if our politics are very different, you have experiences that I can relate to as a human being, which can allow me to see you as not just an alien from another planet, not just sort of an abstract threat in the form of a stereotype. And so that's how what Brave Angels does, is able to transcend that. Now, the thing that we face as an obstacle is not just the fact that, there is this aspect to human nature that is prone to dissension, prone to conflict. The Bible identifies dissension as a work of the flesh. This tendency towards hatred and malice and distrust and so forth. But the fact that becomes artificially amplified by the incentive structure that rewards that way of being in our institutions, that's really the thing that we come up against, because you have that tendency in people to begin with. It's just something that we know about human beings, and we all have to work on that. But when that becomes a pathway towards wealth, towards ratings, towards political power, it becomes basically a sort of, you hear the word system a lot these days, but it's a system. There's a polarization system. And the way it works in a nutshell is that, you've got the media entities who once upon a time, they tried to speak to all Americans, but then at a certain point, they realized that the best way to achieve profitability is to capture your share of the market. So, if you're Fox, you're going to try and capture conservatives. If you're MSNBC, you're going to try and capture progressives and so forth. And so you just repeat a one-sided narrative that doesn't have any internal motivation to take into account whatever the other side of the issue is. And so you just whip people up so they're angry and angrier, and that becomes your market share. When you whip people up like that, it feeds into a political system where the two parties, used to be that the parties would try and speak to the broadest cross-section of America that they could. But now they have the exact same business model as the media, basically, where, in order for them to be able to achieve that 50+1, they really just want to just get a vice grip hold on a certain ideological base of one side of the country or the other. And what winds up happening is all the way down to the level of individual congressmen, you have people who really only need to appeal to 8 or 10% of voters in their district, because those voters are leveraged in the primary. So it's like, okay, I've got 100% of people in my district, but I don't really have to worry about 90% of them, because if I can win that activist 10%, they'll get me the nomination. If they give me the nomination, if I'm in the right district, I'll automatically get the rest of
it's almost a shoo-in.
Exactly. I'm almost a shoo-in at that point. And so when I get to office, I don't have any incentive to actually get to know these Democrats or get to know these Republicans, whoever the folks are on the other side. I don't have any incentive to figure things out. I just need to get in there and make people as angry as possible so my folks back home can look at me as a fighter and send me back here again, in the next term, right?
Right.
And so
right.
It just continues in that vicious loop. And so anytime you have short-term gains that are in conflict with long-term progress, long-term peace and prosperity, you've got a really difficult problem, because it means that people are just not going to see that far down the road, Wilk. They just have the hardest time understanding what's really good for them, because everything is motivating them not to see it.
Right. Yeah, no, I call it that fog model, right? Fear, outrage, and grievance. It's a proven model. That fear, outrage, and grievance, you keep people scared, you keep people outraged, you keep people in some kind of grievance class, keeping them somehow feeling like they're a victim, but then keep on giving them that little incentive to keep on coming back for more, because we're going to give you the answer. But they don't want to actually give you an answer. They want you to give the answer. They're giving you this answer that keeps you right on the edge, right? Yeah. It keeps you coming back. Something I've been thinking a lot about, John, lately is in business, and I've been in business for several years. Business, we need to find the root cause, like root cause problem solving. RCPS is one of these things that we have to, when we have an economic incentive, when we have a financial incentive to get something done, get something fixed right away, we look for the root cause. Look for the root cause, attack the root cause, get it fixed, and move on to the next problem. They don't do that in politics anymore. They do enough to keep that short game going. And if they stay close, and I might not be explaining this the right way, but if they keep that short game hot, if they keep that short game active, right? Keep people engaged in that short game, they can just kind of not worry about that long game. I think we're kind of
yeah.
You're
absolutely right. You're absolutely right. By the way, interesting thing about so many politicians, and this is especially true for members of Congress, is that, interestingly enough, they're not even in a position to really be able to sort of closely investigate some of those root causes, even if they tried. And what I mean by that is that, in addition to all of the other incentives that we just talked about, raising money and interacting with the media is such an overwhelming part of what they actually do in their positions. I mean, theoretically, they're in there looking at the fine points of policy, engaging in educated negotiations with their colleagues in office, and arriving at thoughtful, measured decisions and compromises about the bills that they're going to support. But in practice, what happens is the day they get elected, they start fundraising for the next election.
Fundraising campaigning for the next one.
And basically, they wind up spending a large majority of their time fundraising for the next election and trying to get on cable news to
Right.
get their message out. And of course, in order to get on cable news, they're going to have a much better chance of getting airtime from CNN and whatnot if they're actively talking smack about whatever the other side is, engaging in the partisan
That
warfare.
that hyperbolic toxicity keeps the cameras on.
And in addition to that, because they don't have time to study the issues, they've got staffers and all that. But the people who are in a position to really study the issues are the lobbyists. The folks who are sent there by corporations, and you got your unions and your other folks with money and resources who send folks into Washington basically to be able to say, hey, you guys are in a position to vote on this piece of legislation. We know that you don't have time to do this homework. It's okay. We've done it for you.
We've done it for you.
Right.
How convenient.
Exactly. So while they're engaging this big dog and pony show for the American people, getting us all mad at each other over this issue or that or the third, the actual meaningful work of looking at policy and generating policy outcomes is being done by folks who actually have a vested monetary interest, oftentimes,
right.
or vested political interest in a certain outcome. And they wind up being the ones that actually give shape and substance to what goes into the sausage,
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. So that's the system that we're dealing with. And those are the consequences of not having a culture and sort of, a set of norms in place whereby we're able to just thoughtfully sit down, respect and empathize and reason with each other. It leaves space for this whole other cancerous kind of what's the sort of this cancerous sort of like metabolism in the body politic to fester in a way to where rather than being healthy, this toxic growth is just eating at us from the inside.
Right.
And and so many people think that that's just the way it's supposed to be. It is not the way it's supposed to be, and it doesn't have to be that way.
It is absolutely not supposed to be that way. And for me, a couple of the reasons why I talk about my being a conservative and stuff like that. It's not that and I am certainly in no way one of those conservatives that walks lockstep in with the GOP or any particular politician and stuff. And I want people to get back to understanding that there are several nuances throughout all political parties. It's just typically those that know the least say it the loudest, or they are the most ornery, most bombastic, most hyperbolic, ornery people. They get most of the airplay. So when people think they know everything about every Republican or everything about every Democrat, they're very much cutting themselves short, and they're cutting themselves short. They're cutting the other person short, and they're doing everybody involved in that mental transaction a huge disservice. But when a government gets too big, it does nothing well. When the government is so big, it invites corruption, and so does that money. That lobbyist money, the campaign money, all of that stuff. It just brings us to a point where, okay, we know this system has its flaws. Still, probably the best system that's ever been devised by man. But let's take this system back to a time when our government wasn't the biggest thing in our life, right? Take us back to a time where the government was this transparent entity running certain things in the background, but we really didn't need to know what was going on every single day. We didn't need a 24-hour news cycle, blowing us up every single day. The government was supposed to be this small, necessary entity, but so small that it was just back there in the background of our lives, and politics didn't have to be part of our core identity, and it didn't have to get everybody worked up. And then we just live like neighbors. Maybe that's my utopia, John, but that's what I want back. I want it back to where we don't have to think about politics every single day. We don't have to have this 24-hour news cycle punching this garbage down our throat constantly. That's why I love Braver Angels. I love what we do at Braver Angels because we're trying to show people that, hey, we don't need to listen to and be totally consumed by all these outrage entrepreneurs and grievance grifters out there. We can talk to our neighbors. We can have a meaningful conversation about things that really mean a lot to us
Mhm.
and not constantly be outraged by something that's going on in DC or in some state far, far away. Focus
Mhm.
on what's close, focus on what's right with your life, and work from the inside out.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm with you. We see it similarly. And to talk about all this from a bit of a conservative vantage point for a moment, I forget who said this, but somebody said something along the lines of the bureaucracy must expand to meet the expanding needs of the expanding bureaucracy. Which is which is just to say that yeah, government winds up taking on a life of its own, and it's very closely related to this
Yep.
larger problem of polarization, because really what we're experiencing is a decline in community in America,
That's right.
right?
That's right.
And there's a way in which government sort of seeks to expand to solve all of our problems, but when it does so through means and mechanisms that are, I mean, it's important to say, government is run by actual human beings. I don't want people to. Sometimes we talk about government as if it's run by robots. It's folks like you and me,
Yep.
but because they exist in an apparatus that is abstracted from community, that's not really sort of in community, particularly on the federal level in the same way. It's decision making by people thousands of, hundreds and thousands of miles away from the communities that they're impacting. It tends to be abstracted from the actual concerns of the community, and therefore imposing one size fits all solutions in ways that really could only work if you knew the community up close, right? And
That's
were
right.
in a position
That's
to
right.
understand
Yep.
what's going
Yep.
on. But the other side of that coin, though, Wilk, for conservatives to keep in mind is, yes, on the one hand, the growth of government has a way of impeding on the culture of community in manners that make it make us less able to have relationships with each other because we've outsourced a lot of that to the state. On the other hand, though, I would argue that many of us conservatives need to look in the mirror, because if we are going to advocate for a way of doing politics that stresses individual initiative and communities making their own decisions, well, we actually have to live that life. And I think a lot of what's happened with the church, I think a lot of what's happened with folks who, believe in individual liberty and community sort of in theory, is that we don't always practice that. And that leaves a certain void. If you're not actively out there taking care of your neighbors, if you're not actively out there, trying to set a good example and mentor and support, kids who are fatherless, orphans and widows, to use sort of the biblical terminology. But if you're not actively out there trying to care for the poor, provide opportunity, and otherwise strengthen the community yourself, well, of course, the state is going to expand to fill that void. And so there's a way in which government pushes community out, but there's also a way in which our own apathy towards each other invites the government in to grow and to fill that space.
No, that's absolutely right. I definitely agree with you, and that's why I talk so much about personal accountability and bettering the world by starting to bettering us, bettering the world one attitude at a time. We have to get out there together. Well, we've got to better ourselves first, and then really be the change that you want to see in the world. You're
Mm.
right. I mean, if we aren't taking care of those who can't take care of themselves, then we just aren't doing the right thing as human beings.
Right.
And there's just for too long, and I will kind of round us out with this, just that conservative viewpoint. For too long, I saw too many of my fellow conservatives that just wanted to be left alone. They they didn't want anything to do with politics. They didn't want anything to do with what was going on in DC or in their local elections or anything. They just wanted to be left alone. So
Mm-hmm.
they weren't really engaged
That's right.
until they became enraged, right?
Yeah, that's
They
right.
Yeah, and that's kind of how, and this could lead into another conversation, which I know we're rounding out our time together, John. But yeah, that's how I see the era of Trump and how we got Trump and how we've got so much of what's going on now in the GOP is there were for way too long. There were all these people that they just didn't want to get engaged until they became enraged. Once they became enraged, it was too late, and now that's taken on its own its own life, and I would contend that it's not necessarily a pretty one. But John Wood, it's been what an incredible conversation. Round us out, man. Give me the last couple minutes. Just tell me what you want to see from this conversation. What we've got coming up at Braver Angels, and round us out, man.
Yeah, brother. Absolutely. Well, you of course know, Wilk, and we are both very excited about the fact that Braver Angels is going to be having its first national convention since prior to the lockdown in 2020. We haven't done this since 2019. Last time was in St. Louis, and this was before you were with us, Wilk.
Yeah.
But we will be having our first national convention post lockdown in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, Gettysburg College. And of course, Gettysburg was the site of the Gettysburg Address, the Battle of Gettysburg, 160 years following Abraham Lincoln's delivery of the Gettysburg Address. We are going to be convening in Gettysburg at the site of that tragic Civil War battle to avoid another one. The idea here is to gather Republicans, Democrats, folks way in between from across the country, folks from government, from academia, from media, grassroots leaders across America, artists, musicians, you name it, right, left, and center, to talk about how we can build a movement to heal and rebuild trust between the American people, right? And so that's right. So that's July 5th to the 8th. And I encourage folks to check that out and to register and to join us if they are so moved at braverangels.org. And if you want to follow me, of course, you can find me at John R. Wood Jr. on Twitter and Instagram, Facebook, all that jazz. And anybody who's listening to Derate the Hate, if you want to be a part of the movement to build a house united, come join us at Braver Angels.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you very much, John. I greatly appreciate it. All of that information will be in the show notes for this episode. And as always, keep on doing everything you're doing to better the world, John. Thank you very much. Friends, if there's anything in this episode that provided exceptional value to you, please make sure to hit that share button. Share it with your friends, share it far and wide. And of course, if you haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe right from our website so you can get the Derate the Hate podcast sent to your email inbox every week. So this is Wilk wrapping up for the week, saying get out there, be kind to one another, be grateful for everything that you've got, and remember it's up to you to make each and every day the day that you want it to be. If there is something that you would like to share with me, you can catch me on most social media platforms, or you can email me directly, wilk@wilksworld.com. With that, my friends, I am going to back on out of here, and we will catch you next week. Take care.